Folks, good morning. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Dustin Siggins with Proven Media Solutions. And with me, I have Mark and Greg, and we're going to talk about why hourly billing should die in PR and why it should be replaced by any number of forms of value-based pricing. Greg, Mark, you want to introduce yourselves? You can kind of let everyone know where you stand on this.
Sure. You want to lead off, Mark?
Sure. My name is Mark DeVito. I am the managing director of brand at SKDK. And we're an agency in Washington, D.C. We've been around for a little over 45 years, and PR is a central driver to a lot of the things we do, alongside of public affairs, crisis communications, campaign work, paid media, and so much more. So happy to be here.
And I'm Greg Matusky. I'm CEO and founder of Gregory FCA. I'm also a podcaster in my own right. I have a podcast called The Disruption Is Now, where we talk about all things AI and culture in community and in communications.
That's nifty. Well, didn't you post, Greg, some time ago that AI had given you sort of a rebound of energy in sort of your professional life? That was a really interesting post a couple of months ago.
Yeah, it did. I mean, I have been at this game longer than you or Mark. I'm a senior member of the industry, and quite frankly, the first time I saw ChatGPT, and this was about 3 years after I had undergone my own immersion in machine learning and AI, because I had thought it would be a existential threat. The first time I saw ChatGPT in November of 2022, it was the most joyful day of my life because I suddenly realized I could help other people become effective communicators. And I think I have fulfilled on that initial vision.
That's great. I The reason I called you guys a couple of months ago, we set up this conversation here is I haven't been around as long as either of you, but my company's about 8 years old, and 7 years old rather. And I never really liked hourly billing. I didn't quite know why until a sales mentor a few years ago said, "Well, Dustin, if someone's grinding out an idea poorly and you come up with an idea while you're on a bike ride, should your 1 second idea be rewarded less than someone who worked really hard but wasn't very efficient, wasn't very good at what they were doing?" And that's when I began to really realize how much hourly pay it creates lot of really bad incentives, in my opinion, for when you're billing it. You're incentivized to look at the clock. You're incentivized to not work too much or too little. It creates all sorts of complications on that front. But also as the client, now I have to wonder, did you take extra time? Were you trying to serve me? Or were you trying to serve your billing hours? And as we're going to discuss later in the show, there are, when you're paying by the hour, you're actually rewarding the least productive people on your team versus creating commission value and other base pricing. Mark, you described working in an hourly environment your last few jobs, but now you're currently in a different kind of environment. Can you discuss that a little bit? Lay that out.
Yeah, I'd taken that with me. My journey in the agency world started with WPP back in early 2000s. And at that time, I hadn't had a really good, solid model that I knew either worked or didn't work, and was in some ways um, observing how agency folks who have been doing this for decades and decades had functioned with clients and where they found that value, especially with small teams. I will say, it's interesting because I feel like the collaboration with strong clients who understand what they want to do, but don't necessarily have the right experts side by side to work that out. Sometimes that does take time, and sometimes a lot of clients aren't waiting for us to bestow upon them. And this is back when I was a creative director, waiting for that, genius idea to come across their desk and for them to say, "Oh, wow, this is really great." I mean, I probably have had that happen, a quarter of the time. Most of the time, it's because we've worked together in such a way that there's no pulling back the curtain as much as there is, trying to unveil something that we all agree with. And sometimes that does take time. But
Yep.
I had seen that working, and I had seen that with, with folks who been in the industry for a long time and billing rates were higher, and then left and built my own small shops, and kind of came back into the larger agency world, and now seeing how this works in more value-based pricing and trying to make sure that the work is done is best it possibly can be. Um, yeah, and so I unfortunately came from a time tracking, environment and thought that that was the way to go. How else are you gonna figure out, and statements of work, and how are you gonna figure out, if you've over serviced, and how are you gonna figure out, if we need to add more time and money to the till to ensure that we're going to be on for as long as we need to. It can't be an endless relationship. But I think if you define those goalposts and you define what success looks like, with our clients, then we'll all get there, and hopefully, not looking at every single moment along the way will allow us to use some of that time to be creative with what our solutions are. So I have seen it from both sides to answer your question.
And, I've only seen it from one side. I've never billed an hour in my life. I don't believe so. We do track hours. We do that for pricing so that we have some
Mhm.
idea. But
Right.
we sell on an SOW, and we sell on our expertise and our ability to deliver on KPIs. That more than anything, that's what we really base our fees on. It is a competitive market, like Mark said. Maybe he said that in the pre-interview. We have a pretty good insight on what the going
Sure.
rate market rates are for most things. We're pretty involved with the industry. We go to a lot of conferences. Um, I think, as I said in our pre-interview, I think the real transformational event in this whole conversation is AI and the productivity of tools it provides. We were early to the party, I like to say, 5, 6 years ago, with regard to understanding what world would look like when machines can think and write for us and create, and committed to it. And for instance, we've seen a 13% increase in productivity, revenue per employee. With that took us 100 training sessions in AI among our staff. It took the reworking of the entire workflow. As they say, Edison didn't invent the light bulb by iterating on the candle. He found a new way to light the world. I think that's what AI is, and it's up to us to determine how much we're going to use it, what productivity increases we get, how to set guidelines and safeguards for quality. But there's no question about it. It's going to blow away any kind of hourly model, because you can create many things in fractions of the time. I write for one client specifically what
Mm.
would have taken me 4 hours to create his ongoing op-eds. Takes me about, after the interview, takes me about 30 minutes. So
Oh,
who should
wow.
capture that value? My client values it and loves it. I've spent and invested a lot in AI to be able to do that and to train my people how to do that. I think
Yeah.
that's us. That's for us to capture. And in the new model, our clients are going to expect more velocity at a higher quality level, which I think AI can deliver on. So,
Mm.
I'm not an hourly billable kind of person. It goes back to my early experience as an entrepreneur, where I said, screw it. If I can do it more productive than others, I should
Yeah.
be rewarded, right?
That's great. I honestly, I know Dustin, you're going to comment here, but I love hearing the positive, flow around what AI has to offer, because we're hearing, obviously everybody is starting to have their own relationship with it and expectations and integrations. But I agree with you. I mean, I think it really does. If we're not using it to do our work and some of our thinking, and thinking about that from a sustainability standpoint, I think it's a tool that's going to revolutionize, like you say, everything that we do. And hopefully for the for the positive. And you can often see things that are taken, kind of verbatim and driven by that, and getting away from those models that are using AI as a search engine than, anything else. But it should be a companion. It should be a co-pilot, and it really should, deliver things that are above and beyond, along with our expertise, for the client's
Let
good.
me let me ask you
Love it.
something, Mark, because it's interesting to me. I think you're dead on. But should we bill for AI time?
That's a really interesting component, and I think what the way that you just put that in what you had said earlier still shows the how our expertise can help to still build that model for the client, and not letting AI do a lot of that work. So I think that there's something to be said about that. So one of the things that we're doing right now, and maybe you're doing it on your side, Greg, is how do we build some of our own learning models, right? How do we build some proprietary tools so that we're not, just utilizing what's out there off the shelf, but building things that are more proprietary. It's like hiring our own, teams, or building or making our own teams for the things that we want to do, which I guess in some people's minds is probably even scarier than how they're thinking about AI. But I love thinking about that customization, and what some of the AI agents are doing, that can be specifically devised specifically for a singular client's needs, instead of a more robust, all encompassing tool. And that's become really, really powerful, especially in our world, which is a lot of, news clipping and media looks, and, monitoring things that are happening. Well, in today's DC world and, US world, since we've been on this call, I'm sure massive things have changed. It's happening pretty fast. So I think those kinds of things require some other tools to keep up with that work, that could have taken, somebody who's more of an entry level employee like 6 hours to do. Like that's the stuff that I want to reduce and try to
Yeah,
figure out
I
better ways
agree.
of doing it.
And I have been there. I've developed
Yeah,
my own
right.
platforms. And should I see value for that? One of
Mhm.
my platforms is called Crisis Calm. You preload it with everything you can. You inform the machine about the client, and you can even imagine different scenarios that they may face. And then you go in at the moment of a issue, of a threat, of an existential threat, and you input what the threat is. It walks you through phases. How serious is this? Um, is this? Is this? It walks you through what is the tone, right?
Yeah, that's cool.
Um, who are the stakeholders,
Hmm.
right? What are their pain points? And then
Yeah.
it gives you literally in 10 minutes, it gives you talking points. It gives you a plan, a crisis communications plan. It gives you every document you could ever imagine, from a holding statement to a script for a town hall to a letter to regulators to a
Yeah.
letter to the board, right? A board communications. We built this
Hmm.
tool, so who should see the value from that? So a crisis, let's say a minor crisis might take 20 hours. With
Right.
crisis calm, it'll take 2 hours.
Yeah.
But I invested $100,000 in the platform, okay, in
But,
development fees.
but to your point about value, Greg, we invested 5 grand recently into an AI training and a writing assistant platform that we then customize to each individual author for whom we're writing op-eds. Op-eds are a lot of what we do. Excuse me. I don't think that I think we invest in the value that it's going to bring, because now instead of taking 20 hours and however many other components and try to set up meetings with the client, the value is the client is going to be able to get things done faster, react faster, better,
Hmm.
smarter. So I think that still goes back to the value-based pricing, regardless of how that methodology is developed. Whether it's 100,000 or 5,000, it's about the value the client is going to see on the back end.
Yeah. And yeah, I agree. And I think To the points you were just making, Greg, I think one of the things that we see a lot of times when we're in large group sessions talking about AI industry events, people kind of touch on the input output, philosophies and how those things work. To me, it's much like what we saw in early computer programming, right? The what's coming out of it's only as good as what you're putting into it, and how you're being creative with what you're putting into it, and evolving that process is really where the rubber hits the road, right? And that's where our expertise comes into play. And I think that, to your earlier point, like what you all the things that you get, if you're as good as the years that you've put into this industry, and there are certain gates that have to be included in the thinking and the core approach to what the client's looking for. If we do all of that, then what AI spits out sometimes is strangely accurate, right? I mean, to your point, I mean, everybody's like, well, you're only going to take bits and pieces of that and you're going to adjust that. And look, I'm a writer, even if I put in things that are, for visual media, because I was a television producer for years. I'm shocked. If I had gotten that from like one of my associate producers, I would have been like, here's a couple things to change. But for the most part, looks
Well,
pretty damn good. And I'm surprised by that sometimes.
it's
Well, I
because
think
you're using what Greg's describing. You're using humans to make a really smart model. You're not just throwing
Correct.
it at the wall and seeing what sticks, which seems to be what people interpret when they think of using AI to make content.
Right. Right. Agree.
I
So there's a
think
lot of cool stuff out there.
I think there's no question that the studies show that those who have subject matter expertise in a particular ontology, a particular vertical,
Mm.
um,
Mhm.
they get even more value out of AI because they can do it more quickly, right?
Yep.
Sometimes it's almost like a parlor trick where you sit down and you produce something like you just said, Mark, where you go, oh, change a couple words, but this is fantastic. Well,
Mhm.
it's because the individual who put that in had been a news writer or a script writer for 10 years, and they know
Mm.
what drama is, or they know what
Mhm.
fact-based reporting is, or they can use those shorthands that the
Mhm.
machine can learn. Unfortunately, when you're in your 20s or 30s, no offense, that kind of learning isn't at everyone's disposal, right? So
Mhm.
there's a real debate. Is this going to wipe out the introductory, the junior associates? And there's going to be masters of the universe who have that experience and can do a velocity of work, which is mind blowing in a day. Some days I go home and I just cannot believe, that I created so much in a single day. But I've been at this for 40 years and I know what, as an example, when we started this, we wanted people to identify tone. And I was shocked at how few people knew what that meant, right?
Mm.
Like people, just regular Joes off the street. Tone, I mean, I want it
Mhm.
written well. They don't understand that there's a professional tone or an academic tone or a medical
Or a
tone.
brand tone, right?
Right,
Or
right.
passionate, or right. Yep.
You know.
So those kind of shortcuts that Mark, you would take or Dustin would take are not available to everyone because they don't have the experience. But
Mhm.
how does that impact billing? I know in my own firm, billing has gone up since we instituted and became an AI first firm.
Mm.
Our ability to deliver quality, our client attrition has gone down because clients stay with you when they feel as if you're over delivering, right? Which AI can allow you to do. And our
Mhm.
employee attrition has gone down because people feel as if they're getting something they can't get anywhere else, and that is real world exposure to AI in action. This isn't the Xerox. Let's sell a pencil and sharpen your sales skill. This is rather, how do you do a creative brief in AI? How do you
Right.
do a media persona? Pick a media person and
Mm.
really draw out what their coverage has been over 700 articles and where
Mhm.
the holes might be, where you can
Yeah.
come to them and say, you haven't reported on this, but AI shows that this is a trending topic.
Hmm.
Put those together and you have a compelling new way to pitch, which
No
has never been
question.
available.
Yeah, no question.
So I do want to make sure we don't talk about AI the whole time here.
Oh yeah, I'm
But, I mean,
sorry.
obviously,
It is pretty interesting.
but
Greg did a good job of bringing it back, though,
no,
I have to say.
I agree. What I really enjoyed, Greg, I'm a late adopter to everything technology related. I always am. That AI system I just mentioned, we implemented it 6 weeks ago. So
Mhm.
You should have
I'm
called
way
me. I
behind.
could have done that for you for $1,000. I'd be more than happy to set
But
up
here's
a
the thing. But to
customized
your,
writing solution in
but
open
here's the thing.
in
To
ChatGPT.
your
But we'll
point,
talk later.
yeah. Well, to your point about the billing side, 10 days after the training ended, we had a client come to us. They needed something real fast. They needed
Mm,
five authors, five op-eds written in place real fast for their client's legislative issue. And we were short staffed. I think someone was on vacation and there was something else going on. I wrote 5 drafts. Each one took me about 20 minutes. We set it off through our normal rigorous fact checking, structure editing,
yeah.
copy editing, all of it. And we performed all 5. And because the client needed something fast to give us the emergency fee, we made a 5x ROI 10 days after the training ended.
Hmm.
And it's because without that AI, we would have maybe gone able 2 or 3 at most,
Right.
and would have worked
Right.
until midnight. So let's throw that back a little bit though, because AI is the extreme, not the extreme example. It's the sort of big example that says if you produce faster, why should you get paid less? But let's also bring that to sort of expertise. Evan is a consultant watching us right now. Evan and I have talked about the right kind of pay because he left Fleischman Hillard, launched his own consultancy. Should he be billing by the hour because he can bring more value for those hours than he did at Fleischman Hillard? Or should he bill by a project? Should he bill by the outcome? How should consultants bill? Maybe when they're being brought in, not for their ability to produce something quickly, but to produce a high level outcome that's more of a strategic
Mhm.
sense.
Well, I would go back to what Mark said, and open the floor to him when he was talking about the nature of his work in finding common ground with the client, and it's not so
Mhm.
much the I'll show my age, Bewitched, right, where Darren
Ha!
would come in with at the last minute, and the witch would like give him the tagline, and the client would love it, right?
Samantha.
Exactly. But Mark, I'm interested in that. Tell me about your work, the nature of that, and the
Mm.
closeness you are to the client. That's interesting to me.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. I think first, your question, Dustin, around um, and I've been there, as a break free from, the big agency network and trying to start my own thing and building that from the ground up. And sounds like, Greg, you've been in the same boat, building your company. You have to think about what your resources. You can only do so much, and now with AI, obviously we can do more, but there's still so much, and you also want perspectives to be brought into the mix. And so, bringing in other consultants and other, vendors and collaborators is of the utmost importance. So when you're pricing those things out for your clients, you have to think about how much those people will want to be paid, or if you're bringing them on full time, like what does that overhead look like as you grow, and how do you sustain, success for your company, unless everybody's a 1099 and then you're trying to figure that piece of it out. There's a lot of different ways of cutting that up. But, getting back to your question, Greg, I think, you know, it's important to realize that if we're working, side by side with a client and trying to find that, in some ways kind of the holy grail, or trying to get to that place where we're starting to see real change and impact happening, that we're really thinking about like the bigger picture. I don't necessarily want to bring in more junior staff to help to augment some of those things. I often like to, and now that I'm seeing it with my own agency, that's very, senior level driven, which at first gave me pause. I'm like, oh my God, being in a billable hour environment for so many years, I saw this top heavy environment, and I'm like, only so many are going to be able to afford these kinds of things. Whereas we all kind of do a lot of the work, and it's hard to almost describe that. And I kind of love getting back into being more hands-on, from the beginning to the end with everything. And I think that also creates this value-based, environment. for how we're doing it. Sometimes, I'm probably doing things that I would charge less for, and other times I'm doing things that I would charge three times that for, but it's not necessarily some kind of scale that needs to be calibrated or thought about. I think it's how we bring ourselves to our client and how our brand of our agencies are seen in the marketplace as being, cross collaborators and real partners to the clients instead of what we've done traditionally. We're your partner and we kind of are, but if the times are right and the budget's right and all these things are right, instead of just being, really relational with what they need to do and how they need to do it.
And I think that go ahead, Greg. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to shift more of the work into those more valuable, high value areas. One of
Hmm.
the things that I find is there's not enough discovery on the front end
Mhm.
with clients
Hmm.
to be able to use these tools effectively and see productivity. So,
Mhm.
my point, I think, is that there's room for uh, there's room for a lot more moving up the food chain, like Mark was talking about,
Hmm.
especially in policy, especially in legislative issues, right? Where you really have to understand the nuance and then the players who you got to bring into this to have an end game. And in that, I could see that being unpredictable, right? How many op-eds would you have to write, or how many meetings on Capitol Hill would you have to have, and when would those meetings be likely to happen? Or
Hmm.
so that I wouldn't know how to price, quite frankly, right? And I think it might call for hourlies at the hourly billing at the highest level. Um, but then once that plan is built, I think you could scope it pretty easily as to what's needed and how you could have a retainer type SOW relationship.
Agree.
And to your point, Greg, we had a call yesterday with a prospect in the college basketball NIL space. I didn't know what NIL meant until a week ago, but thankfully my colleague does. My colleagues do, and they brought this prospect in the door. 5, 6, 7 years ago, I would have jumped in and tried to give answers. But because I've been around the block a few times, to your point about experience, we were able to get a lot of relationship built by asking questions about goals and then bringing it around to their point of view. And there was someone else on the call who isn't the president; he's probably the operations director, getting his perspective, and he brought some cautions to the table. You know, bringing that experience on how to get a prospect comfortable, get on the same page, find the solutions they may not be aware exist, and build the campaign. That has nothing to do with AI and everything to do with the experience you talked about, Greg, but also the ability to drive real value before the relationship is even, the contract is even signed. And I think that's where a lot of, if you bill by the hour, then you're worried, am I investing too much time in this prospect? Where's that line? Whereas if you have more of a project, like we do, a project-based situation or a retainer-based model, then you know that that's going to be made up on the back end 2, 3 months into the arrangement.
Or you can adjust, I mean, having
Sure.
that retainer, based model, no matter what, you've agreed to monthly, gives you that flexibility to really look at where are we
Mhm.
spending most of our time, do we want to shape shift that, to a greater degree? And I think that adds to the value-based environment, right? It adds to like thinking about those things. I've done both, which is even more, fraught with all kinds of peril where you're billing hourly, but your retainer is reflective of exactly what that hourly time tracking is. So you've got a few senior level people in there with some mid-level and a couple juniors, and that, 10, 15, 20, whatever it is a month gets eaten up really quick,
Yep.
And then having that conversation with the client who, depending upon the size of the client and, their wherewithal with external funds is, to usually to their dismay, they don't want to have that conversation. You're telling me that you've kind of capped off on the things that you think you could or couldn't do this month, or so that's not happening, in this kind of environment. At the same time, I do think that it is, if you're working with dozens of clients, even in your sphere, not across the agency, but just in your sphere, and you've got multiple teams doing those things, we're still running a business, right? And at the end of the day, like, you have to have some handle on that. I have so many questions for Greg because he's been doing it in the way that he's been doing it for so long and
Right.
successfully. Like, you could drive a class on that. Like, that's really interesting. I feel like there's adaptive and adopted models that happen in our industry based on prior experience from those practitioners coming into play. And there's not necessarily like one sort of approach that works for most things, or in that very diverse, philosophy environment. So I'm always trying to figure out how to make sure that the business is still balanced, our approach to the work is still balanced, but the client wins. It can't be that the house wins. It has to be that they win.
Well, along with billing, I got a question for you, Mark. Do you have an ROI that you shoot for? You don't have to tell me what it is, but do you manage on ROI overall?
I have in the past, and trying to find that, that margin that made the most sense. Um, I'm not seeing as much of that now, and I think a lot of it is we still have to, like I say, we still have to protect the agency and protect what our goals are, from the business, which is important. It's not profiteering. It's, we're selling a service and you're buying a service, and if we're delivering really well on that service, then we should be rewarded for that, right? And so I think what I've seen is that ROI is based on the client, right? In an environment where there's very dynamic range and level of clients. In our business, because we do so much, social, justice, social litigation, policy, working with issues that could be the smallest little organization that just needs our voice. And because we care, then we'll give them time in order to make that happen. And alongside that, we're working with some very, very, very large, global influential organizations that can obviously afford a lot more. But should the ROI in those situations, or the way that we see that model, have a massive shape shift, or should it be based upon the types of work that we're doing and the types of teams that we're building and the goals of that relationship? I have to believe that typically the bigger the relationship and the bigger the client, engagement, the more that they need, from the agency. But not always, right? The old term "death by a thousand cuts." With my small boutique shops, I was always scared of the small contracts that came in, because with a team of 10 people, 12 people, those contracts took up all of their time. And then when I was working with a Fortune 100 company, much more lucrative, took up half the time, of the team, and much more orchestrated process. That's the other whole side of this. That could be another whole podcast, another whole conversation, working with an organized, experienced client team versus one that's never worked with an agency and
Yep.
doesn't understand how to work with an agency and wants to do everything by committee. How do you balance that into the equation? And to me, it's very important. I always tell my clients, I'm like, this is awesome that you're all here, and I know you all have an incredible, voice and dedication to the goals that we've set, but I can't have all 9 of you making decisions, all 7 of you, on what we're trying to do. It's going to take twice as long and take up,
Hourly
much more
billing, you
space.
make more money if it took twice as long, Mark. If you were doing hourly billing,
If you're
you
doing
make
hourly
twice as
billing,
much.
right, exactly. But most of the time, if things are timely, like that, like they are in our world, especially in policy or in, there's a very specific date that we're trying to hit for all the reasons that we all know. Um, you're just working harder in the same time period, so but I hear you though. I mean, that's a tricky side of it. And so I try to help our teams understand how to create a good client environment, even if they haven't had experience working with people like ours. How do we help to educate them so that we all have the best experience and that we're not, going too far, with the amount of work that we're trying to do with those teams. So I
Well, I think you,
think I've answered the
you got a
question
lot
for
of
you now.
wisdom in that, a lot to unpack and a lot of wisdom. I do manage by ROI, and I look for
Yeah.
agency-wide ROIs. I hope there's
Mm,
a blend that'll bring us. Part of what I do is I'm always looking for acquisitions, so
mm,
I know what we need to demand in a deal, right? And I would think anyone would apply if they were looking at us, right? So
mm.
I'm always looking for a 15 to 20% ROI and on a blended rate within their industry. And that impacts
Yeah.
your billing rate because, if you have a steady workflow, you have to maximize your billing rate in order to
Mm,
reach those targeted ROI. So whereas we don't do hourly billing, every team in our firm knows what their team ROI against their labor costs and against
yeah.
their revenue. So that's kind of the dance we do.
I think that's really that to me like really speaks um to balance, right? I mean, the blended rate approach I'm wholeheartedly on board with. You know, trying to find an ROI that's like manageable and not, overly, imbalanced, especially when you deal with creative endeavors a lot of times because you are looking at external partners. Sometimes that ROI needs to be much higher in order to make it work. But I think that yeah, I agree with your approach. I think without knowing all the things that, that we all do with our clients, it seems like that's definitely a good way at it.
Real quick, Brian has a question here, and anyone else can feel free to ask a question. We'll just definitely try to get
Oh,
to them
cool.
here. So Brian asked, hang on one second here, is how do you show the value of hang on, if time allows, how do you frame the benefits of value-based pricing from the client side? And I'll answer it from what we do is we can tell everyone this is what we charge. There's no from the start, but we have a project-based model. So we fill gaps for a lot of
Mm,
marketing agencies, PR agencies, consultancies, and whatnot. So you know what our pricing is. And if we have a retainer, it's because you know that you're going to get these services swapped out for different value or different amounts every month, depending on your needs. But being able to be that transparent at the front end on the value-based pricing,
mm,
we have done what you've described, Greg, is we have a blended profit. We know that if we do, for example, if we write and place an op-ed and we have to find an author, that's a certain price. We don't make great money on the writing side. We're making better now. We're using AI, but we make the great profit is on the pitching because writing a pitch takes a few minutes. We can get it placed, and that's where we make it up from the rest of the project. So it allows us to have that nice blended rate, but now the client knows from the front what's going to happen, what it's going to look like, we have our process and our guarantees on our website. So by
mm.
having everything really transparent and easy to understand, that value-based pricing comes through. And I'll close this noting that also there's a big part of value is, are you streamlined for the client? We have very specific processes that are in place so that the client knows what things are going to look like on their time commitment to a campaign.
That's a good point. And a lot of clients want to know that, like what their investment is. And
Right.
it's a really important component of that initial, statement of work. I've actually with certain clients that were very concerned about that. I actually build that into the statement of work. Here's what your expectation is going to be in interfacing, in a pretty regular cadence with the team. Another reason to have a small, client committee on that side and making sure that
Sure.
everything is very, the more people, the more time, the more concerns that they have on their side. But I think that's a big point.
I think I'll tell you a quick story unrelated to PR. I
Boy.
I had to do some winterizing of my mountain home, and it's just a lot of manual labor I had to do. And there was a local guy, he was Mennonite, and I met him, and he has a power washing company, but I wasn't using him for that. I was using him for this 3 hour winter maintenance, winter redding my cabin. He was very interested in how to scale his power washing business. Like, how would I do this? I want to quit my job. I want to do this full time. I just don't know how to scale it. So at the end, right, of the project, I asked, what do you want? And he said, oh, $25 an hour. Okay, it's 3 hours, 75 bucks.
Hmm.
And I said, here's 200. The first lesson, I just gave you the first lesson in scaling. You need to sell value and not hours.
Mhm.
My value for him to help me for 3 hours was well over 200 bucks. It was still a
Right.
deal. And he priced it at 75 with hours. So
Right.
I think, how do you show the client? First of all, client retention is the ultimate measure of value, right? You can do
Right.
all kinds of things, but if they're not happy, they're
Mhm.
not staying. There's other reasons, companies fall into financial distress and what have you, but
Sure.
usually,
Mhm.
Probably.
that's the ultimate measure. And we struggle to find value through our KPIs, although I think that's going to become a lot easier in the era of AI. But if they don't see value, they're out the door, right? And
Mm.
they can see value in the actual results. They can also see value in the creativity and risk management you bring to the table. When I say risk management, I think, Mark, you would appreciate this in your world. There's a lot of unseen risks in the day. We live in a very divisive country. If you say something incorrectly, if you position something incorrectly, if you're not of the times and you don't understand the time, you would understand this, Mark. You open yourself, your client, to a great deal of risk. And having that senior management that can say, you don't want to go all the way to the red line here, folks, or you got to lean into this and take ownership of it, is something that is very valuable. And then the other side is the creativity. I had an incident yesterday, and one of my people came to me. They've been flogging a bad idea for 2 months, and it's not getting anywhere, right?
Mm.
And it was with local TV, and it was obvious. In local TV, everything's local. Nothing you've told me is local. I don't see the family on the sofa crying, right? I don't see the bank coming to their rescue that's based in the town, right? Make it local. And again, is that creativity or is it experience? I don't know, but you can then create, value by making it local, getting exposure for what they're
Mhm.
doing in a time frame that's much less than selling an alternative credit score story. Like, who cares? Who cares? But if you get that family credit and they can buy a new home, and the bank was the savior, wow, you've just created a story, and it's all within WNBC Detroit. It's a story all of a sudden.
Well,
That's the
the,
value.
Mm.
you're right, Greg. As you were talking, I was thinking about how two companies that have been in controversy this year popped back up on my LinkedIn feed somehow from people posting about them: American Eagle and Cracker Barrel. I don't think there's been a company this year that has tried harder and spent more hours trying to dig itself out of a crisis than Cracker Barrel. And they're still digging it deeper
Target,
within what's that?
Target,
Fair, fair. I can see. I can see Target.
and a few others, but yes,
Sure. But Cracker Barrel has
I hear
spent
you though.
so much effort digging itself deeper. The
Yeah.
more it talks, the worse things get.
Mm,
Contrast that with American Eagle. American Eagle was silent after the Sydney Sweeney thing arose, and
mm,
a lot of people thought they should be responding. And my view is that today you can always have trolls attack you. The question is, are they affecting your bottom line, your core target audience? And I thought American Eagle was smart to be quiet, and
mm,
it sounds like that's actually positively impacted their bottom line. They
mm.
spent less time and effort, but whoever advised them to be quiet gave them a lot more value than whoever told Cracker Barrel keep on talking. And both of them have been in
Yeah.
huge controversies this year, but one seems to be rising out of it, and one seems to be digging deeper
That
and
And
spending their effort digging.
look what you just set up as far as
that's a
value,
big one.
right? The
Yeah.
value proposition. I mean,
Yep.
that obviously, in the end view, the ability to sit there as an objective third party who's not emotionally tied to this and is of the time, right? They're
Mhm.
not living in New York City drinking $36 cocktails on a
Right.
rooftop bar, but
Yeah.
rather they know honky tonks and tailgates when they represent Bud Light. That's value. That's
Right.
value.
And
You
that's
know,
knowing your client, right?
I'm sorry.
And
And that's knowing your client too.
Right.
Knowing the environment that they're in.
Right.
yes.
The
Mhm.
environment, the times,
Yeah.
what's worked in the past, where the risks are, delivers real value.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And look, ChatGPT is never going to be able to do that. It's never going to be able to understand, to risk proof what you're
Correct.
doing and to supercharge it. If you say American Eagle supercharged it and Cracker Barrel played into the risks, I mean,
Mm,
those are human foibles. They're not machine driven
right. That's
mistakes.
exactly right. That's exactly right. And navigating that is its own area of expertise. I think it was I think it might have been Keith Richards who had an interview a while ago and said, the real brilliance to good songwriting isn't all the notes that you play, it's all the notes that you're not playing and how those pieces come together, to create real art, and to create that balance. And
I
so I
thought that
think,
was Pete Townsend, but I might be
was it
wrong.
Pete? I was, that's why I was kind of pausing there. It might have been
Think of
Pete.
Pete's style,
It
where
sounds like Pete. Yeah, no,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
that's a good
I'm going to date myself and use Google instead of ChatGPT to find this one.
yeah. That's good. I dig you, Greg. That's awesome.
I
Yeah,
always give that story as Townsend. I don't know.
yeah, that's good. That's good. That's good. It might. I was almost wondering if it was George Harrison, but I think you're right. I think it might have been.
Yeah. Who
And
knows?
Google says Miles Davis.
Oh, oh, hmm. Maybe in his later years, when he would come out and play like three notes.
But no less the valuable point, Mark.
Yeah, exactly. Um, but I think in those these are critical times, and what we say and when we say it and how we say it and how much we say, to the earlier point is, it's a huge component to everything. I mean, I think that I'd like to keep thinking that, some of the outcomes, although I said this in Trump's first term, some of the outcomes of some of the chaos could be, refining process and refining thinking and refining things so that we do evolve. There's always a little bit of dark before the dawn, right? And you got to go a couple steps back to go, four steps ahead. Because right now it's just a waterfall of information, and it's difficult to parse and difficult to understand, how to process all of this. So I think even in our world and thinking about, what we're offering clients and what that looks like, to your point, Greg, those kinds of instincts can't be driven by AI. And the more it gets to know us, it might know that we appreciate and understand the value of, that cadence of communication and what
Yeah,
that
but
looks like.
you informed it.
But we informed it, right? And it's following along, not just on that path, but also offering some alignment that, that might give us some other things to think about. So yeah, I think that's a really interesting part of our world, and but not everybody's adopting that. You're seeing it in different areas. Take you saying that you have like an AI first, or you like a very pro AI agency, that's very unique. And maybe that's just in the world that I'm in here in the, Washington, D.C. area. Nobody would say that, right? That would be in a lot of their eyes the kiss of death. I disagree. I think that the tools that are out there that are here for us to customize and create more things that can help us, should be embraced, in a lot of ways. But, I think maybe the very first point that was made in this live stream is, we have to be a part of that evolution. We have to decide what we want to use and what we don't want to use. I love customizing things that are in some ways proprietary of the organization, but at the same time, then that's a little limiting too, right? So you have to be open to other areas of influence that can come into play there. Um, yeah, the biggest thing for me from a creative standpoint is all the generative AI. That's the bigger thing for me. All the other stuff that we're talking about, and deciphering information, and coming up with you know plotting and planning, and building those kinds of things. That's great. Generative is a trickier, much bigger conversation, and does have a conversation within, all the things we're talking about with pricing. I mean, it's a big one, and I don't think people are thinking about the impact of a lot of that on, even psychologically, on what we believe to be the sourcing that we want our audiences to think about, and how those things are coming to play. And for those who appreciate, where we've come artistically and culturally in the last millions of however long, that's a game changer, in a way that I think is deserves more context, and how people are navigating and using those things. But as I
Well,
say,
I agree with you.
bigger conversation.
I often give a presentation that talks about this is the first time in human history that somebody else, aside from humans, are doing the storytelling. And
Mhm.
storytelling is so fundamental to the human condition. It's how we exchange information, it's how we actually remember facts. And there's some evidence that one of the reasons Homo sapiens succeeded over Neanderthals is they were quick to trade. They learned how to trade. When you think about trade, that
Mm.
has all kinds of storytelling. What's the value? Where'd this come from? Why is this
Mm.
stone more valuable than that stone? And this is the first time now that machines are going to be part of that. And as you said, that is a big sea change, right? And I think what we see in AI right now is a lot of cheap things that can be done with it, like videos that have an anchor, an announcer in Times Square. I mean, I've done this, saying funny things to walk,
Yeah.
man on the street videos. That's easy to do, right? What's not easy to do is replicate exactly what you want that video to do, right?
Mhm.
And the exact person, and to have consistency. We still can't do a full movie. We do There's a reason we're doing 8-second clips, so
Yeah.
it's not as easy as everyone makes it look.
Right.
On the LLM side, a little different in that there's not as much variation, that it can come to some sort of logical conclusion. And how this impacts billing is, at least in my agency, right now, on the creative side, we do a lot of project billing because AI can take a designer just as long as Adobe. It really can,
Mm.
because you get back misspellings and it's
Yeah.
still not there. I think we're going to need a whole new AI system to do that. And that's
Mm.
what the CTO of Meta always says, and it's never going to be there. But I do think on the language and storytelling side, and I mean the written story, it is a big change. It is a big change, you know.
Yeah.
So there's a
Agree.
new intelligence. We're going to find alien intelligence here on Earth before we ever find it out in the
Well,
cosmos. So
here's a good point, and you dated yourself earlier, Greg. I'll do the same for myself. When I started getting into writing, in political writing, I got out of college in '08. and I wanted to stay out of politics, but there weren't many jobs available. So I went out of DC and I became a blogger back when you could make an income blogging. And I was writing about Medicare, the Social Security Administration's trustee reports. And my father said, Dustin, you wrote like a 24-year-old. And I said, what are you talking about? I said, I'm taking the facts, I'm putting them out there. Like, what's your issue? Now we've just landed a bunch of pieces at USA Today, The Hill, and Spectator World, not because of the data, but because the compelling story. The physical therapist who has a challenge over here can use some of the data as a backdrop to the storytelling. And it's hard to know how to do that when you're 24 years old. And in my case, I'm a little bit more left brain than average. And so, it was harder to understand how to do that storytelling. And so AI with the right training from senior leadership could probably help junior people develop those skills more quickly. But you still need those senior people giving the guidance because there just isn't that experience, that value-based experience.
You're dead on. That's a really good point, and I think it needs that. It needs those people who understand and really appreciate what storytelling is. The richness of the detail. It's just not a physical therapist. It's, she's from Montana and with two young children. That's
Right.
what AI misses. It
Exactly.
can't replicate that all. And so because of that, the storytelling doesn't hit right on. It still needs that human to humanize it. So
Yeah.
Hey, Mark, you said you would have dropped right at noon, but I want to get everyone's roundtable reactions, and then we're going to jump. Is
Cool.
going back to the point of the conversation, why hourly billing should die. I keep thinking about it as we're talking here. Hourly billing means I've got to make a certain amount of money and I have to put that certain number of hours in. What if I get brought in for a quick project? I'm a consultant or a small agency like ours has 8 people. I get brought in for a quick project. I could always give a discount if I want to, because I know it's not going to take me much time because I happen to know somebody or I have a strategic insight. And for a smaller client, if I really need to keep things going through the holidays, it just hit me that value-based pricing gives a lot more flexibility that you can control versus hourly based billing. You have to hit those hours or your consultancy agency is shafted.
It's the power washing story. It's
Right,
exactly
right.
that, right? I
Exactly.
mean, I think that you're not discounting the work or you're not, overcharging for the work, but I think you're creating an environment where um, this is if this is what you want the outcome to be, this is what it's going to take to get you there. From our perspective, we can negotiate a little bit, but I always even find negotiations to be a little tricky. There's certain things that you can negotiate in our industry. But then I think about other industries and how unnegotiable some of those things are. Don't get me wrong, I love to negotiate. I think everything is like the bazaar, it's we there's always some way of, making that happen. But I think that there's some things you just don't negotiate for. You're not going to walk into Starbucks and be like, can I get it for $2 instead of 3.50 for a cup of coffee? I mean, this is how much it costs.
I want to be clear. I wasn't saying you should always negotiate. I was
No, no,
saying
no, no, and I'm not
you
I'm
should
not
always be
insinuating that. I'm just
providing the negotiation, never let
yes,
yourself
yes,
negotiate.
yes.
I
And
want to
and
be
I think
clear
that
on that.
and there is a balance there. I mean, those things, can be brought into the mix. I usually think of negotiation as trying to hone in on what that level of effort could and should be, for the challenge that's at hand, and if there's a way of either spreading that out or trying to find ways to make it more valuable to do certain tactics and not others, then that's really where the negotiation comes in. But yeah, but I think it really comes down to, um, you know, I think it needs. I like Greg's baselining around ROI and then how the agency kind of looks at that. But then everything else, in my mind, and what makes our industry so human centric is that it's dynamic, right? It's looking at the situation, it's providing a bespoke solution that that isn't cookie cutter and isn't what we did with the last client that came through the door with the same challenge. So in those ways, and if they are, I mean, I think in our industry, we're starting to see more and more, and I'm sure Greg is feeling this after being in the industry for a long time and having great relationships. I know I do. People seek you out because of what they know you've done and how you've done it and what they think of your own brand. So as a brand strategist, I'll, leave you with this. I think part of what the next decades in our industry look like is bolstering not only the agency brand, but also and helping our clients with their brand, but also our individual brands, right? Like, what are the things that we're bringing to the table? It doesn't mean that we're all off doing our own, it's not a co-op, but it is it's a consortium of those brands, those people that are knowledgeable, that are known in the industry, that can deliver. Um, and you're putting a value on that, right? And that's exactly what we would do as brand strategists when we're thinking about how to properly position an organization to be sustainable for the next however many years. Like, what's the value we want to put on the organization? How does the messaging match that value? How do we, process that, and how do we put that out into the marketplace so that people understand what it means? So I think we got to do more of that ourselves.
Greg, you'll get the last comment.
Just with a quick anecdote, I recently changed law firms. I had a big law firm charge me $8.50 an hour. Okay. I went to a small law firm. Guy charges me $8.50 an hour. The big law firm, though, I ended up paying a lot more in the final bill because they would charge me to do a conflicts memo
Right.
within the firm to see if they could handle the issue. They would charge me for research. They would charge me for junior people who would look over it. My bill on an issue would be $7,500. Small issue, $850 an hour. Now, the smaller guy who's right down the street from me charged me $850 an hour, and the same issue would cost me $2,000. He's not doing conflicts issue. He's not holding meetings within the firm about which way this should go. I trust him, and it's better value for me. So I think the hourly thing really does try to focus. It does focus people on things that ultimately do not deliver value to the client. And that's just my example from life. And I will be with this lawyer the rest of my life because it's simpler, it's value driven,
Yeah.
and it's done.
Love it.
Well, folks, this was a lot of fun. And Greg and Mark, as I said on the pre-call, hadn't really met you guys before we started having this conversation. This has been a lot of fun to get to know both of you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
Hey,
you.
Greg, what's your podcast? Because I wanna
The
subscribe to
disruption
it.
is now.
Okay. All right,
All
cool.
right. All
Cool.
right.
All right, folks.
I'll be
Thanks
in
a lot.
touch. I'll send you both guys a note. It was a great meeting both of you.
Awesome. You as
All right,
well.
guys. Enjoy your day.
Bye-bye.